For even the most casual of modern tourists, the monuments of Roman civilization are inescapable and unmistakable. Their sheer size and grandeur are at the very least evidence of great expertise in building techniques and of vast wealth for the realization of ambitious projects. But these buildings were not built merely to impress. Many of them were there to satisfy the everyday needs of a complex society, as here in the covered market in the Forum of the Emperor Trajan, which was built in Rome in the early 2nd century AD. Or here, by contrast, the aqueduct of the Pont du Gard in southern France, whose arches carried water for the people of the city of Nîmes, 31 miles away. Or in theatres, such as this one at Merida, which is evidence of the need to gather large numbers of people together for political meetings and dramatic performances. These monuments also survive in a diversity of geographical settings. In the 2nd century BC, the Romans expanded across the Mediterranean Sea into North Africa, where the evidence for their elaborate lifestyle now stands deserted. Scrub and sand now occupy the streets once trodden by Roman citizens. They also moved eastward into the mountains of Lebanon, leaving temples such as this one to Jupiter at Baalbek, and somewhat later westward to the wet Northumbria hillside. Yet in all the diversity of landscape, what actually strikes one is the essential unity of architectural design, evidence of the unifying power of military might and political and cultural domination throughout the Roman Empire.
All this is, of course, an impressive survival of a defunct culture. But for scholars and students, it's more than just that. The temples, bridges and theatres represent important source material, as vital and informative in their own way as written texts. Throughout the course, you'll be studying this kind of source material as well as the written texts. What you've seen so far comes from a wide historical span and illustrates certain basic facts about the Roman Empire, its size, diversity, and underlying unity. But only 2 or 3 of the big buildings you saw actually fall within the period of the course. Most were not yet built. I have to admit that the Augustan age was not visually the most striking age of Rome, and some of what is left over from the period survives as a result of later rebuilding on a more massive scale. But by a detailed survey of what remains of Augustus's own buildings in Rome, I hope to make clear that the age of Augustus is crucially important. It's a turning point in Roman history, the point at which the focus of power shifted decisively from the Republic to the personal rule of the emperor. Let me explain this by turning away from the monumental and looking for a moment at the smallest, the most easily transportable and the most durable of artifacts, coins. This one, from Asia Minor, probably Ephesus, was minted in 28 BC. On the reverse, a simple message, pax, peace, with the figure of peace holding a staff and standing on a sword. The symbolism would have been obvious, even to those unable to read Latin. On the obverse, a portrait of Augustus, when he was still called Octavian, and an inscription, Imperator Caesar, son of a god, in his 6th consulship, protector of the freedom of the Roman people. Another coin from the other side of the empire, minted in Lyon in France at a later date, about 10 BC. On the reverse, a decorated altar, and underneath another simple message, Rome and Augustus. On the obverse, another portrait with the inscription Caesar Pont Max, Augustus Caesar, with the title of one of his offices, Pontifex Maximus, head of the state priesthood. These coins reminded inhabitants of the empire that they were part of a centrally controlled community. And it was during this period that control became identified with the personal power and authority of Augustus himself. Now to the monuments themselves. And remember, we are looking at them as evidence for the nature of Augustus's political achievement. Let's start by considering how Augustus can be related to his predecessors by looking at some important buildings in the center of Rome.
To the east of a bend in the river Tiber lies the center of ancient and modern Rome. On the west lies the Capitoline Hill, on which stood the ancient citadel. On the south, the Palatine Hill, the area of earliest Roman settlement. Between these two, the Roman Forum. For centuries, the area of the Forum at the foot of the Capitoline Hill had been very important for the Romans. Originally a swamp, then drained by the early kings of Rome and used by the early settlers on the Palatine to graze their cattle, it later became the center of legal, political, and commercial life. The most extensive collection of public remains in the Roman world now lies at the heart of the busy modern city. Buildings from all periods jostle each other in close proximity. We shall pick some that are significant. This building, the Curia, owes its good state of preservation to restoration by Augustus and later emperors. It was the meeting place of the Roman Senate, and in origin very old. An earlier building on this site was destroyed in 52 BC during riots which accompanied the funeral of Clodius, a political agitator murdered in a brawl. This open space is the Comitium, where, in the early Republic, the representatives of the people met to elect magistrates and vote on matters referred to them by the Senate. The long raised platform, the rostra, served as a dais from which Roman magistrates addressed the people. This building, inelegantly draped in green sacking during restoration, is the Temple of Saturn, whose vaults housed the public treasury in Republican times. Behind, on the hillside, the Tabularium, the state record office, erected in 78 BC and one of the most impressive surviving monuments of the Republic. And the center of ancient Rome is now at the heart of modern Rome, surrounded by buildings reflecting the continuing importance of Rome as a political and cultural center.
Those buildings in the Forum reflect the public nature of political life in the late Republic. It's interesting to note also that they were put up by prominent individuals. Building was a prestige activity, a way for powerful and wealthy men to enhance their reputation and leave a lasting memorial. But where does Augustus fit into all this? In his Res Gestae, Augustus's own account of his achievements, his building activity has a prominent place. Chapter 20. In my 6th consulship, that's 28 BC, by authority of the Senate, I repaired 82 temples of the gods in Rome, omitting none then in need of repair. Now, Augustus clearly aimed to outdo his predecessors, but also to do rather more than that, in a sense, to restore Rome. Let's look at some of the buildings that were a lasting and daily reminder of his achievement.
The remains of the Basilica Julia stand in the south of the Forum. Built by Julius Caesar in 46 BC for legal and financial business to ease congestion in the main Forum, it was destroyed by fire and rebuilt by Augustus. Even the scanty remains give some idea of its great length and size. On the north side, and parallel to the Basilica Julia, is the Basilica Aemilia, an old foundation restored after fire in 14 BC. Augustus met part of the cost. Outside the Forum proper lies Caesar's Forum, the first of the imperial fora. We are told by the historian Appian that Caesar built the Forum in 46 BC, not for commercial use, but for the transaction of public business. The temple was dedicated to Caesar's great goddess ancestor, Venus. Augustus tells us in the Res Gestae that he completed the unfinished project. A reconstruction of the Forum, somewhat simplified, as it was in the 20s BC, shows clearly the relations of the main buildings to the central square of the Forum. On the right, the Republican buildings, Curia, Rostra, Temple of Saturn, and behind, the Tabularium. Down either side, the basilicas Julia and Aemilia, and behind the Curia, the Forum of Caesar. Augustus himself completed the square in 29 BC by dedicating a temple to his adoptive father, Julius Caesar. The site of the temple marks the eastern limit of the original Forum. Only the podium survives. Within the semicircle is an altar which marks the spot where Caesar was cremated in 44 BC. It was from here that Mark Antony read out Caesar's will. This building emphasizes Augustus's close connection with his adoptive father. To look at his building work further, we leave the Roman Forum and pass north to Augustus's own Forum. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, where he and Antony defeated the Republicans, Brutus and Cassius, Octavian, as Augustus then was, vowed to build a temple to the god Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger, to avenge Julius Caesar's memory. The temple, surrounded by a forum, was finally completed in 2 BC. The whole complex was in Roman times adjacent to Caesar's Forum. The modern roads now separate them and cut off the whole of the southern half of Augustus's Forum, leaving the remains of the temple and north and south wings. Suetonius tells us that Augustus built his Forum because the increase in population and number of lawsuits made the 2 existing fora inadequate. It was therefore opened as an emergency before the temple was complete. An imaginative reconstruction gives some idea of what the original would have looked like. The modern remains give a deceptively open appearance. Note the much more enclosed aspect of the original, not only in the central inner room of the temple, the sanctuary, but also in the elaborate porticos and apses which flank the central building. Behind the front columns of the temple were statues, among them Augustus and probably Mars and Rome's first king, Romulus. Behind were Venus, Mars and Julius Caesar. All these have long since disappeared. Time has, however, preserved some of the columns, which give us an idea of the size of the building. They are marble. One of Augustus's best-known claims was that he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. Caesar began, and Augustus developed the use of marble from quarries such as Carrara. At this time, it was normally a veneer for other materials. Much was burnt for limestone in the Middle Ages, and there is little left to see now. The remains of highly decorated pavements afford a glimpse of the original splendor of the floor. A dominating feature of the Forum is the exceptionally high perimeter wall, originally over 100 feet, made of local stone and faced with marble. This wall probably served as a fire break. It also excluded the view of shabby housing in the slum quarter to the immediate northeast, the Subura. When building the Forum, Augustus had difficulty in obtaining all the land he wanted without arbitrary appropriation of private property. The closeness of modern housing to the Forum wall clearly illustrates the problem. Finally, the most unusual features of the Forum, which give us the biggest clue to its function and significance, the porticos and apses. We know that these were linked with statues commemorating the great men of Rome's past, the illustres viri, including Augustus's own family, past and present. we can still see clear traces of holes where the gabled portico roof joined the rear wall. Behind this, the wall of the apse, in which niches are to be seen. These are now, alas, empty, but originally contained statues of heroes who, by their brave deeds, raised Rome to its present glory. Augustus himself proclaimed his purpose. "This have I done, to bind the Roman people to require me, while I am alive, and also the princes of ages yet to come, to live by the standards set by these great men." The temple had been vowed in battle and dedicated to Mars, and it had strong military associations. Augustus arranged that the Senate should meet in the temple to discuss questions of the declaration of war and the granting of military triumphs. The Forum was also to be a ceremonial place for the departure and return of those taking up military commands. In this way, the honouring of past heroes was closely linked to Rome's present military might.
The elder Pliny, writing in the mid-1st century AD, described the Forum of Augustus as among the most beautiful works which the world ever beheld. Well, unfortunately, as you've seen, we don't have enough evidence either to support that judgment or dispute it. Yet, what we've seen does, I think, make its function clear. In his Forum, Augustus is shifting the focus of power and government away from the old Forum with its republican associations, and doing it not only in the military sphere, but also in civil administration. The idea of the hero, which the statues represented, linked Rome's past to Augustus's personal style of rule. The Forum is a display of his own prestige and that of his family.
An area of Rome in which Augustus built extensively, together with Agrippa, his right-hand man, was the Campus Martius. This is by the side of the Tiber to the north of the Forum. Unfortunately, very little of Agrippa's building survives. However, we owe to the industry of Italian archaeologists of the 1930s the reconstruction of a marble altar, the Ara Pacis Augusti, the altar of Augustan peace. Augustus tells us that the Senate decreed that the altar should be consecrated in honor of his return from Spain and Gaul in 13 BC, and annual sacrifices should be made commemorating this event. The Ara Pacis was dedicated 4 years later in 9 BC. The interior consists of a rectangular precinct in the center of which is an altar approached by steps. The walls are decorated above with garlands suspended from bull skulls. Below, vertical fluting suggests a wooden enclosure around the consecrated place. On the south, outside wall, the sculptor has depicted a procession of the imperial family and friends. Augustus, between 2 blocks of stone, is only partially restored. He is attended by priests and officials. The poses are stately, but relaxed, and the younger members of the family set an informal tone. Prominent is Agrippa, more so in the Restoration than Augustus himself. On the opposite side of the altar, there is a similar procession of magistrates, senators, and their families. The figures are depicted in a style which combines classical restraint with realism. For example, these priests, with their strange caps surmounted by spikes. Equal care was exercised over the pattern of decoration. On the west and east sides are panels depicting legendary scenes. On the south side of the west entrance, Aeneas, the legendary hero and founder of the Roman people, sacrifices on reaching Italy. On the south side of the east entrance is a personification of Italy, or Mother Earth, bountiful mother of all the inhabitants of the empire. The decoration around the main figures emphasized the association of Mother Earth with agricultural fruitfulness and prosperity.
The Areopagus is an example of a monument whose function is entirely religious and political. It symbolizes peace, just as the Forum of Augustus was primarily concerned with war. But you shouldn't get the idea that all building was like this. Just as vital as military success and administration was the everyday functioning of the city. Augustus and Agrippa were also responsible for the reconditioning and renewal of aqueducts.
Augustus boasts about it in the Res Gestae. I repaired the channels of the aqueducts, which in a great many places were falling into disrepair through lapse of time. Actual charge of aqueducts was in the hands of Agrippa from 33 BC to his death in 12 BC. This arch, crossing the Via Tiburtina in the Aurelian city wall, carries 3 of the aqueducts which supplied Rome. The uppermost, the Aqua Julia, was built in 33 BC by Agrippa. It was restored by Augustus in 5 BC after Agrippa's death. The uppermost inscription reads, "The Emperor Caesar Augustus, son of the divine Julius, Pontifex Maximus, in his 12th consulship in the 19th year of tribunician power, repaired the channels of all the aqueducts."
Whether building a temple or an aqueduct, Augustus was demonstrating his prestige in taking over responsibilities and concerns which had originally been those of the Senate and Republican magistrates. Finally, and fittingly, we come to a building which expresses very clearly Augustus's dynastic aspirations.
Augustus's own family burial chamber, the mausoleum, now lies in the middle of a busy street, not far from the Areopagus and near the river Tiber. This huge circular building was constructed comparatively early, in 28 BC. The geographer Strabo describes it: a huge mound near the river on a high base of white marble, covered with evergreen trees to its summit. It bears on the summit a statue of Caesar Augustus, and within the mound are the tombs of himself, his kinsmen, and his friends. Ironically, Augustus survived most of his family, including his 2 grandsons and intended heirs, Gaius and Lucius. The mausoleum spans Augustus's career and, in a sense, epitomizes his achievement. By the time he finally entered it in AD 14, having lived beyond all expectation, a family tomb had become a dynastic monument and a symbol of imperial supremacy.